Hello and welcome to Mr. Chan's online lesson on classifications of plants and animals. Through this simple online lesson, you will learn very simply how biologists classify plants and animals. Classification is actually a very simple and routine thing that people do all the time, not just by biologists, but by people all over doing all sorts of things. So basically what I'm trying to do is just putting it onto slides, what this classification is all about in simple terms. So let's take a look. Now first and foremost, why do we need to classify? Of course, it's always easier to organize into smaller groups in order to study and understand things better, especially when you are faced with a lot of information or data or even just things. So it's always easier to break it down into smaller groups. Second, it's easier to keep track of things, basically to help identify them easier. For example, if you break into smaller groups, you classify them, you can help identify what they are, what group they belong to, so that you can always tell people about it easier. And last but not least, it provides a point of focus such that it's ultimately easier to trace it back to origins and build relationships between things. So that helps in relating and identifying and communicating. So this building relationships is actually the main reason why people classify things. If you don't believe me, you can take a look at this very simple example. I have downloaded a whole bunch of pictures of things you can find around in your house. One look, it might be quite difficult to see or even classify them or even start to understand what they are. And you notice that immediately in your own mind, you will start to classify them into certain categories. For example, you could put them into what belongs in the kitchen, and you can see knives and pots and pans and spatulas and things like that. And then maybe you might put another classification called the toilet, or cleaning equipment. So naturally, our brain, when we look at a lot of items, we have a tendency to put them into groups so that it's easier for us to classify them and then understand them better. So how do we actually classify anything? First and foremost, this classification is actually comes from a ancient philosophy. Aristotle was the first one to come up with ways to classify things, but that was just a start. And over the many years from then, different people from Italian doctors, Danish physicians, Dutch biologists, have put together different ways of putting living things into groups so that we can better understand them. And ultimately, what we know now as classification is actually started by this person called Carl Linnaeus. It's not really started by him, but he actually put together the different rules, the different groups, based on even people from as far as long ago as Aristotle and the different people, different biologists, physicians that we've talked about. And so right now the most famous classification for biology, for living things, is actually the what we call the Linnaean taxonomy. Now taxonomy is actually a science of classifying things, which we will learn a little bit on how it really works. So how do you really classify? Now, first thing, everything is arranged in certain ranks or in certain levels, you could call it. And after that, all living things are given unique names that consist of two parts. A very simple example is human beings. For example, it's called Homo sapiens. So we are given two names, Homo and sapiens, and these two names are unique for that species. So different species have the unique names, and that's one very important thing to take note when you want to classify things together. So you can't call different things the same name. That will confuse things, obviously. And ranks are then related to each other by physical, structural similarities. Maybe one way to think of it, how it really works, is you could take a look at our previous example. Now, if you take a look at that previous example, you will notice that you could actually classify them based on structure. For example, anything with a long handle is considered as one group. So you can have spatulas or brushes or mops, or anything that has a sharp cutting edge. You could consider the knives, the scissors, so things like that. Any structural similarity just means anything physically makes them related together.